Hi folks! During the last couple of weeks we played quite a lot of Dominion Seaside boards. So in this one it's about time to summarize what we learned. And we're gonna go through each Seaside card and we're gonna say just a few key things about each. So let's start with Ambassador. And Ambassador is a centralizing attack. It's one of the strongest cards in the set and actually in the whole game in general. And on most of the boards, you're gonna open with at least one ambassador, and sometimes it's gonna be two ambassadors. You can't really lose the ambassador war. You can't fall behind on the return in your junk cards. So one especially frequent mistake the newer players make is that they draw in their ambassador with only one estate and a couple of coppers in the early game, or 3 coppers. They return the estate, and that is very bad. You want to return as many cards as possible. So especially in the early game, return the coppers, return 2 copies. Yeah, it's better than return a single estate. Always keep in mind this late game trick of returning 0 copies of a card. And that will help you to ease the pile out in some cases. So should be useful to keep that in mind. Alright, next card on the list is Bazaar. Bazaar is a nice village because it boosts your economy a little bit while being an important engine component, a village. The only downside of Bazaar is that it's a bit too expensive. At 5 coins, the thing is, usually most of the important draw cards you want to add in your deck and quantities cost a bit more than villages usually. So most of them cost like 5 or 4 coins, and coupled with the village being that expensive, it's all, it becomes a bit harder to build this kind of engine. But yeah, that's a one downside of Bazaar. Otherwise, very good card. So let's move on, and the next one is going to be Caravan. Caravan is a nice and convenient draw card, because starting a turn with the increased hand size is extremely beneficial. Also, adding more caravans to your deck is very easy because they are non-terminal and thus they don't require any additional village support. The only downside of Caravan is that actually they are not too powerful, because a single caravan only gives you 1 extra card every other turn. So keep that in mind before going all in on caravans, because maybe there is something more powerful you can add to your deck this exact moment. So next one is Cutpurse. Cutpurse is a nice early game attack. It usually is not as devastating as like Ambassador or Ghost Ship, but it might prevent your opponent from hitting the all-important price points at the start of the game, and that can be quite important. So the worst enemy of Cutpurse is the strong copper trashing, because I mean, if they don't have any coppers, you won't deal a whole lot of damage. Alright, let's move on to the next stop, which is going to be Embargo. Embargo is not by any means a strong card. You rarely want to buy it, and when you do, you usually just use it as a one-shot silver, as a short-time boost to your economy, as a silver which does not stay in your deck. And the choice of pile on which you put the Embargo token is rarely meaningful. In theory, if your opponent is pursuing the different strategy from your own, you can try to slow them down by putting the Embargo token on the piles that are important for their deck but not for yours. But in practice, this very rarely comes up, and it takes a lot of time to set up, and usually it's just not worth it. So the next one is not exactly a powerhouse either. It's just an explorer. Explorer's biggest weakness is the opportunity cost. There is usually something better to buy than explorer. It can be useful sometimes though. Most common case, I think, is when your payload requires trashing cards. For example, Salvager, right? So Explorer can be used to provide fodder for your engine. There are definitely better gainers in the game for sure, but sometimes they are not there, and Explorer might as well do. Next up is Fishing Village. Fishing Village is a good card. Making sure you have some additional actions at the start of the turn really boosts your deck's reliability, and that's very important. The only downside is Fishing Village does not draw you any cards. So on boards where draw is restricted, don't overgain them. And sometimes you just would prefer a regular old good village to a fishing village just because of that. Now let's move on to Ghost Ship. Ghost Ship is nasty. It's one of the most oppressive attacks in the whole game. And usually if there is a way to build an engine that plays a Ghost Ship every single turn, you should definitely go for it. The one thing that Ghost Ship is not good at, it's actually not that good at drawing cards, because it only draws you 2 cards and it's terminal. So ideal case, you only have like 1 or maybe 2 Ghost Ships, and the rest of your draw comes from a better source. Alright, so let's move to the next stop, and that's Haven. Havens are nice to have on most engine boards. If you're already overdrawing your deck, they may help you to set up the next turn by setting aside the important engine components, which is always great. Or maybe you didn't have the terminal space this turn to play both terminals that you drew in a single hand, so you can set aside one of those to play for the next turn. But most of the time you'll probably set aside unused coppers or estates, which is still useful, because a lot of times this will make those cards miss the shuffle. Don't overgain Havens on the boards with limited draw, because every time you play Haven, it nets you -1 card. So having to play several in one turn might be quite challenging. Anyways, next one is Island. Island is not a strong card, but it indeed has its uses. It's mostly good to make your greening go a bit smoother by setting aside those freshly bought green cards. And sometimes in the end of the game, you'll just buy islands because they're worth more points than estates, and you just didn't have enough money to buy the duchy. Let's move on to Lighthouse. Lighthouse is the best attack protection in the game, period. If you can consistently play one every turn, it renders all the attacks useless. But if there are no attacks on the board, or if they're like weak and you don't really care much about them, then lighthouses are bad, because the main effect, this duration copper, is very weak, so don't buy them if there are no attacks. Alright, next one is Lookout. And Lookout is a good one. It's non-terminal, so you can easily add more copies if you really want to get thin quicker. And while trashing only a single card, it also discards one, thus allowing you to move through the deck faster. The one obvious downside of Lookout is that trashing is mandatory, so if you reveal 3 good cards you don't really want to trash, it will make you sad. But honestly, in a lot of cases, these situations can be prevented by good deck tracking. Next one is Merchant Ship. Merchant Ship is a very bad card, don't buy it. Native Village is a very unique card. It is at its best when you can control which card you are going to set aside. Thus you can build up to the mega turn when you set aside basically all the game long, and then on your last turn you pick it all up and play a bunch of payload and end the game. Also, it is sometimes possible to just set aside the cards you don't really want in your deck, like your starting coppers or estates, or like the end game green cards like provinces and duchies. Most of the time though, this controlled setting aside won't be possible, so native villages are still useful in these cases, and basically they're like a weaker version of regular villages, because on every 2 plays of the native village you're gonna draw 1 card. Alright, next one is Navigator. Navigator is a very bad card, don't buy it. Outpost can be a game changer. It is best on the boards when you can build a lot and overdraw a lot. Duration draw cards are specifically good with Outpost because they greatly increase your chances of kicking off your turn, and these chances are not necessarily otherwise good with the 3-card hands. So Outpost is not worth it when there is no good source of draw. Next up is Pearl Diver. Now, it's not like Pearl Divers are bad, they're just useless. The effect is very marginal, so usually you just buy them when you don't have enough money to buy anything else, and most of the time you just don't care whether you have them or not. Now, Pirate Ship is actively bad, and the biggest weakness of this card is that it actually helps your opponent to trash Coppers at the start of the game, and that's a very big deal. Also, it is criminally slow, so to make your Pirate Ship worth at least a gold, you would need to play it 3 times, and that's minimum. So it's very, very big. So yeah, as fun as this card is, avoid it at all costs. Salvager is a strong and versatile card. It can be used in early game to get rid of your estates, while boosting your economy a little bit, but it really shines in the end game where it can seriously spike your economy by trashing expensive engine components, treasures, or victory cards, which can be used to end the game. Sea Hack is an undeniably strong attack on the boards with little to no trashing, and sometimes it's not a wrong move to get 2 copies of Hack on such boards. But its attractiveness drastically fades as the amount of trashing grows. So the biggest problem with the Sea Hack is that it does nothing for your own deck. So sometimes putting increased effort in trashing is just more efficient than buying your own hack. Smugglers are very hard to summarize because the effect heavily depends on the board and on your opponent's strategy. As with any other workshop variants, Smugglers are stronger on boards where you can play the gained card the same turn. Alright, next card is Tactician. Tactician is at its best when you can play one every turn, starting each turn with 10 cards and additional action and additional buy. This requires the board to have strong virtual coin payload though, and definitely not every board can qualify. A single Tactician approach can also be used to spike this really good turn for a deck that's not otherwise all that good. Next card is Treasure Map. Now, Treasure Map is a card you would usually not buy at all. If you're not drawing your deck, then trying to collide those maps can take a lot of effort. And even if you do collide after all, top of the deck is the worst possible place for those golds to unload. The best use for treasure maps is when you can gain 2 of them mid-turn and then play them and then draw the golds all in one turn. So that's quite good actually, but that really requires a really strong engine to be around. Next one is Treasury, which is nothing to write home about, to be honest. They are a nice addition to your economy, but for money they provide, they are way too expensive, and at this price point you would usually prioritize buying strong engine components or attacks. So let's move on to Warehouse. Warehouse is a solid way to make your deck more consistent. It allows connecting your engine components more reliably, and it helps drawing through coppers, estates, and maybe green cards at the end of the game. So if you have some overdraw, Warehouse can also be used to set up the next turn. So for example, if you can discard 3 good cards in your empty discard pile and then draw, say, one of them with like Pearl Diver, then you're gonna have 2 good cards left on top of your deck, and that's pretty good. Alright, and now let's talk about Wharf, which is an incredibly strong card. It is a centralizing card on most of the boards it appears, and it's very good in both engine and money-ish decks. So Wharf Draw is so strong that it actually allows you to go a bit easier on trashing, and it allows you to get a bit more payload as usual. The rule of the thumb is get as many as possible, support them with some villages, and see your engine go nuts. Now apparently we went through all of them, so yeah, that's it. It was a big pleasure for me to make these videos, and thank you for sticking around and making it this far. And see you next time.